Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Keep Your Continuous Improvement Efforts on Track. My name is Alexandra Chofi, Director of Marketing for Operations Strategy Consulting. In a recent survey of manufacturing executives, 70% of respondents said their continuous improvement efforts failed to cut costs by 5%, the typical minimum threshold for successful productivity programs. The main reasons cited for failure were all controlled by the organizations themselves. The good news is, these pitfalls are predictable and easy to avoid once you understand how to identify them. This webinar will explain the most common reasons continuous improvement initiatives fail to deliver on expectations and what you can do to avoid these pitfalls. Presenting today's webinar will be Megan Burns, Founder and Managing Director of Operations Strategy. She has more than 15 years of industrial engineering and supply chain management experience. She has spoken at industry conferences, and her articles have appeared in both regional and national publications. A certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt, Megan has worked with companies throughout North America and in 14 different countries. Before we get started, we would like you to know that you can submit any questions you have for us in the comment box. Megan, we'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. And you're right. Many organizations do get frustrated with their continuous improvement efforts and the lack of results that they're getting from them. However, the results are all within those organizations' control. What we're going to talk about to you today is the 8 most common mistakes and pitfalls that we have seen organizations make with their continuous improvement programs. And we're also going to give you guidelines on how you can avoid them so your continuous improvement program will be successful. The first pitfall that we've seen is what we call the flavor of the month. And this is where, in an effort to be on top of the latest and greatest, an organization will launch a continuous improvement program. And then after about 1.5 years to 2 years, it launches a new program. Maybe this time they will launch Theory of Constraints. And then after another 2 or 2.5 years, they'll launch Lean. And then another 2 years, Six Sigma, and so on and so on. And what happens is, after an organization has launched 3 different improvement programs in a span of 6 or 8 years, the employees and the team members really begin to get a little jaded. They fail to take the newest initiative seriously because they figure they just wait around long enough. Eventually, it will change, and they'll have to just pretend they care about the new program. So how can you avoid this? Well, the key is consistency. Don't try and chase the trends and the latest and greatest. Just pick a program and stick with it. Because when you look at all of the continuous improvement programs out there, they all have pretty much the same underlying structure, which is define what it is that you're trying to improve. Baseline yourself so you understand where you currently are. Figure out where you want to be. Develop a plan to get there. Execute it. And then put some controls in place to make sure you don't go backwards. So whether you choose Lean, Six Sigma, Theory of Constraints, or some other continuous improvement program out there, just pick it and stick with it. This will give your employees the continuity and the understanding that this program is not going anywhere, and you will begin to see the results that you're expecting. Now, the next pitfall that we have is focusing on everything. And this happens when an organization has picked a continuous improvement program and then tries to tackle every process in every department at one time. I actually had someone say to me once, we have 78 key strategic initiatives. And the problem is you can't really effectively get anything accomplished if you're trying to focus on that many different initiatives. You are just diluting too much effort, and quite frankly, it's very difficult to try and manage that many projects and hold people accountable. So, what should you do? Make sure your continuous improvement program is linked to your overall business's strategy. You're going to be so much more successful if you prioritize your efforts, identify what those top 2 or 3 initiatives are, and focus like a hawk on those items. Once you've made some improvements and some impact, go ahead and expand from there. But you need to build a track record. You need to build momentum and let people get involved and see it's going to work, and let them get involved. By linking these, you're going to be much more strategic and even competitive in your industry, because most organizations are not doing this. Now, our next pitfall is what we call Project Cure Cancer, also known as let's boil the ocean. So this very common mistake that we see is when a project team is defining their initial project scope and they define it so broadly. What happens is the project team leader and the team themselves quickly become mired in all the processes and all the data and are very quickly overwhelmed. And as a result, the project either stalls or dies, and the underlying problems are never resolved because it was just too largely scoped. People cannot keep that type of focused attention and effort on a project for 9, 12, 15 months without seeing results, without seeing an impact. So, what should you do? Well, narrow down your project scope. Keep narrowing it down and narrowing it down to something that you can actually get your arms around and that can be completed in somewhere between 4 to 6 months. I like to recommend a target of 4 months because chances are that you're going to run into some hurdles and it may expand out to 6 months. But if you can narrow down that project scope, you're going to be more effective. You're going to be able to get to the root cause of your problem or the key drivers much more quickly. Your team members are going to be energized because they're making progress. They're seeing an impact and they can see the end of the project. And that's going to give them the pat on the back that they need to be able to wrap it up and jump onto another project, which is what you want them to do to begin with. Now, the next project that we run into, or the next pitfall, is very related to poor project scope. And this is what we call project scope creep. And when we don't define our projects very firmly up front, it's easy when we have a very innocent sounding request come in to modify the project. It might sound like, well, did you consider looking at, and for example, if you're looking at some quality problems on a part that's being machined on, say, a CNC, and if you start out looking at the setup, how is the CNC setup, what's the program, all the offsets and the adjustments, and someone comes in and says, well, have you looked at the material that's being used? Have you looked at the vendor of that material? All of a sudden now, your project is expanding beyond just that initial scope of what's involved in the setup. So, how do we avoid this pitfall? The best way to do it is to establish a formal sign-off. The reason why a formal sign-off is important because it really helps avoid frustration. The last thing that you want to do is finish a project, think that you got the result, present it to someone, and they say, oh, that's not what I wanted you to look at. So if we establish the formal sign-off at the outset of the project, we can have agreement between the project owner, the process owner, and whoever is championing the project, so that everyone agrees at the outset of what the expectations are, what the expected delivery is, and the area of the project to be focused on. That way, when those innocent sounding requests come in, we can say, yes, that's a great idea. However, this is what we're focusing on. That may have to be a secondary or a spin-off project. Now, the next pitfall that you want to avoid is also related to the project and the project definition, but this is called poor problem definition. And this frequently happens with managers, executives, supervisors, when they want to fix a problem, because they typically define the problem by what they perceive the solution to be. And let's face it, can you blame them? They're paid to go around and solve problems all day. The mistake is that they define the problem in terms of what they think should be there or what's missing. The problem is we don't have a particular database. The problem is we need a new piece of equipment. Or the classic, my people just don't pay attention. And we're never going to get to the root cause of the problem because we don't know how the problem is manifesting itself. We don't know what the nature of the problem is, and quite honestly, we haven't done any analysis yet to really know what the root cause of the problem is. So how can you avoid this? Well, let's understand what is the nature of the problem. Use the 5W2H tool so you understand what happens when the problem is present. How does it manifest itself? And measure, measure, measure. Go get some data. Track. How often does it happen? When does it happen? What's the frequency? To what degree do we have a problem? And whether that's a tick sheet that you put out next to a piece of equipment or you have a formal data collection sheet that everyone is tracking in a database, it doesn't matter. We need to just make sure we're documenting it. And when we do that, we can then redefine our project in terms of the nature of the problem. And you will solve your problem much more quickly than if we don't do this step well. The next pitfall that we fall into is not committing resources to a particular problem. And all too often, I have seen managers assign people to projects that are aimed at solving major problems, and then in a short amount of time, they pull those individuals off the project to go do some firefighting. And it's the typical approach of, you need to go rework these parts, stop working on your project, or these continuous improvement efforts are getting in the way of production. We need to be able to ship. And if we would just let people work on their projects, it could eliminate the problems that we're then trying to go firefight. So how do you avoid this particular pitfall? And this is a hard one. You need to stay committed. You have to be willing to focus on the long term. Okay, don't give in to those temptations to pull your people back off the project to do the urgent. You need to let them focus on the important, because if we don't ever fix the problems, we will never get out of this cycle of firefighting. And the challenge with this is it's hard, because when you have problems all around you, the natural temptation is to figure out, who can I throw at this problem to get us through the next hour, the next shift, or the next day? And so we really need to resist that and keep that long-term focus and be able to balance that with those short-term needs. This is probably one of the most challenging things you do in your career, but if you can keep focused on the long term, and you allow people to solve those problems, you will be amazed at how much capacity, time, and resources you free up to be able to go do other innovative and creative things. Okay, so the next pitfall is not just that we're not committing resources. We're actually committing them, but we're committing the people we can afford to commit, the poor performers. This is sort of a corollary to our previous pitfall. If we assign those people to projects who can be spared, who it doesn't really matter if they're off working on a project, are you really assigning the people who can make a difference in your organization? Or are these the people that maybe shouldn't really be in those roles? So the best way to avoid this, make sure you're committing your high performers. You've heard the saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, because then it will get accomplished. And that's the same concept here. If you assign your high performers, those who have authority and influence within your organization, your continuous improvement efforts are going to have a much greater effect on your organization than if you just commit the individuals or the resources that can be spared. And if you want your continuous improvement efforts to be successful and deliver the results, doesn't it make sense you would commit the people who traditionally have delivered results? So we need to do this here as well. Our final pitfall is also the #1 reason why continuous improvement efforts fail. And this is a lack of executive commitment. And the bottom line is, if your organization's CEO and executive team are not committed to your improvement program, I'm afraid to say I don't think it will ever succeed. You may get some progress pushing up from the bottom. However, you're not going to get the results that you want. And for those who say, well, our executive team is supportive of it, support is not sufficient. Support really is just lip service. And your team members and employees recognize the difference. They know what lip service is, and they know what true commitment is. So how can you avoid this? You have to have executive commitment. You need pigs, not chickens, okay? When you look at breakfast, that pig is committed to breakfast. The chicken is just kind of involved. It supports, yeah, breakfast is a good idea. The pig is the one who is committed, and that's what we need in our executive teams. We need executives and CEOs and managers who are going to hold their teams accountable for improvement efforts and results. We need them to be involved in project reviews in progress and get trained themselves. Make sure that not only can they talk the talk, but walk the walk. And if they do this and hold people accountable, there's a ripple effect. Measurements drive behavior. And there's a difference between an executive who says, yes, we need to do continuous improvement, but, oh, it's the end of the quarter and we need to make our shipment date. Yeah, it's not the best quality, but ship it anyway. Compared to someone who is committed and says, how many projects are you working on? What's the impact of those? And if we're not measuring up, guess what? We're going to have to put a hold on that until we have fixed the problem. And if you can drive that into your culture, this comes back to that long-term versus short-term view. You will be much more successful long-term than you ever will be if you only focus on the short term. So if you can avoid these pitfalls using these strategies, your company is going to see much better results than your competition who falls into these traps. So again, those critical success factors for any continuous improvement program are going to be #1, that executive commitment. Make sure that your continuous improvement efforts are linked to your overall business's strategy and supportive of your business's strategy. Make sure that you're measuring impact. It's not just the number of projects that are being completed. How do they affect the bottom line? Okay? If they don't affect the bottom line, they're probably just expensive science projects. And again, focus on the long term. Don't be driven by all of the month-end, weekend, quarter-end, short-term focus. Really look at where are you going to be a year from now, 18 months, 2 years from now. If you can do that, then you are going to be significantly more successful than your competitors.
Thanks very much, Megan, and we also want to thank all of our viewers. For upcoming webinars, you can visit our website at www.theoscedge.com. And if you would like to contact us for any reason, you can also email us at info@theoscedge.com.